give a little word on homilies or homiletics, preaching in the Catholic Church. Things have changed over the last 20 years. I imagine just about everybody here has access to the internet now. And if you go online and if you Google best Catholic homily, 5th Sunday of Easter Seed, you can find all kinds of great homilies. And if you had something, you can AI, what is the best Catholic homily for the 5th Sunday of Easter, concentrating on the Scripture? You can find that. There are all kinds of resources out there that would really dive into these readings. And occasionally I do that, but I think my style is maybe in some ways similar to Father Al's. And then I see my role these days not so much as explaining to you things that we can find other places, but trying to make connections between our lives, between what's going on where we are, and what themes emerge from the Scripture, and where the energy is. So some people might say, oh, he didn't really talk too much about the Bible. He didn't really talk too much about church teaching. We can find those other places, and sometimes I do preach on those, but, well, you can just see how the homily goes, and you can let me know after that. So, 3 years ago, if you can think about 3 years ago, that would have been 2022, my life was very different. I lived in Buffalo, and we had a different hope. We had a different presence. And my daily routine was very different. I lived with just 2 other friars rather than with 18 other friars as I do now. I lived in a city with no big hills. And I lived in a city where chili was never served with spaghetti. So 3 years ago, I imagined things were probably different here as well. 3 years ago was the house still full of friars here? Yeah, there were a few. There were a few. Okay, we're still the mother house, right, for the St. John the Baptist province. And I imagine the neighborhood has changed over the past 3 years as well. When I looked at the readings for today, the line that jumped out at me was the last line of the first reading about opening the door of faith. So I figured I'll look back. I have a homily file on my hard drive and on my flash drive, and I went back to see what line jumped out at me 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I preached about the same thing, opening the door of faith, even though it was a very different context back then. So I said, well, let's look back 6 years, because the readings repeat themselves every 3 years. And 6 years ago, that was before COVID. Remember that, 2019. Again, I preached on that line, opening the doors of faith. So I guess that must mean a lot to me, that line on opening the door of faith. And maybe it's because we seem to be closing so many doors these days in the church. In just the past 3 years, the Franciscan friars, we moved out of our ministry in Buffalo, where we had been since 1858. We closed those doors. 3 of the other parishes where I was helping out in the Diocese of Buffalo have all closed their doors. The seminary in Buffalo has closed its doors in the past 3 years. So lots of church buildings have been closing. But let's not confuse that with doors of faith. Today in our second reading from the book of Revelation, the risen Christ says that he makes all things new. And the image is of a new Jerusalem. For some of you here, that's probably a symbol heavy with meaning. Even as far away as Buffalo, not so much in the 1970s, but in the 1980s, I heard of the New Jerusalem community here in Cincinnati. And I went online the other night to find out more about it. And I asked some of the friars at St. Clement, who were here in Cincinnati at that time, when that community was emerging, as I understand it, from Teens Encounter Christ at Roger Bacon High School, Charismatic Renewal. It's an example of how doors of faith were opening and how the risen Christ was making all things new. And I was surprised to find that the bike ride that I take to avoid as many hills as possible, hills along nearby Mill Creek, and then I pass within just like 2 blocks where a lot of that was happening. At St. Clement right now, in 2025, we're trying to figure out how to open doors, how to make things new. We're going to write a new parish mission statement. And partly I looked at the parish mission statement here. Your mission statement, you say right there, over the Rhine. Our parish mission statement in St. Clement is quite generic. It can be used at any Franciscan parish, really, anywhere in the world. So we're going to try to write a new one that's more specific to our context at St. Clement in St. Bernard. We're launching a new website. Just got a message a couple days ago from somebody who said, your website is awful. We know it is. Maria Plain, who helps here with catechesis, she is going to be launching a new website for us, hopefully later this month. We also noticed that our parish brochures are out of date, so we're going to be making new parish brochures at St. Clement. But my experience in church communities, going back more or less to the late 1970s, is that the best hope for doing what we hear in the last line of the first reading, opening the door of faith, and what we hear in the last line of the second reading, making all things new, is that when we do what we hear in the last line of the gospel, when we love one another as God has loved us, that's when the doors open. But don't get me wrong, it'll be great to have a new mission statement on our bulletin, and a new website, a new brochure. But the way for our church and our faith to grow won't be seen in how many bulletins we print or in how many likes we get on Facebook, but on how readily our parishioners can answer, where have you seen us love each other at St. Clement recently? Or, where have you seen us love each other at St. Francis Seraph recently? The last time I preached here was March 16th. And 10 days after that, one of our friars who had been at St. Clement for several months, Brother Ed Rasich, passed away at our healthcare facility in Wisconsin. Brother Ed led the music at our school, our parish school mass, from the end of August through the middle of November when he got transferred because of his health. But Brother Ed noticed that there was no alma mater, no school song for St. Clement's School. So he wrote one. And the class that he chose to lead it was the 3rd grade, because they seemed to sing the loudest at Mass. Do we have any 3rd graders here? If you're in 3rd grade right now, would you raise your hand? Anybody in 3rd grade? Oh, great, we have a 3rd grader. Any others here? 2 of them? Wonderful. Okay, so guys, listen up. Okay, and I hope that your 3rd grade experience, that what you're doing in 3rd grade will sound like what I'm going to talk about right now. But let me also ask, how many of you have ever been in 3rd grade? Raise your hand. Okay. So, our 3rd grade teacher at St. Clement has something very, very special about her. She seems to really get the most, the very most, out of her students. When I had been at St. Clement less than a month, I thought I'd start waiting in front of the school at this sometimes so I could get to know some of the students and some of their families. And the first student to come up to me and say hi, because nobody knew me, they all knew Father Nietzsche. The first student to come up to me and start talking to me was a girl from 3rd grade. By the way, this afternoon at the noon she'll be making her first communion at some time. A few months later, I started having lunch at St. Clement's School. I got to tell you, I don't know what the lunches are like at St. Francis Xavier, but the lunches at St. Clement's School are really good. And when I first got over there, a lot of the students were like, well, who's this new priest? He's not Father E.J., and especially 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. They're like, I don't want to have a priest sit with us at our table. But the class that welcomed me the most, that said, Father, sit with us, was the 3rd grade. This past January, I was overcome with emotion when, after the school mass, someone came up to me to ask how she could be baptized, how she could become Catholic, because she was brought up actually in a Jewish family. That was our 3rd grade teacher. When Brother Ed passed away in March, it was the 3rd grade who gave me 3 messages to take with me to Brother Ed's family at the wake up in Wisconsin. And it was the 3rd grader who asked me in front of the entire class one of the most touching things I've ever heard anyone ask me. In front of all her classmates and her teacher, she asked me, Father Judd, were you crying at Mass last Sunday? When I was in 3rd grade, I wouldn't have dared to ask a question to our parish priest, much less one that was that personal. The biggest group of students who come to our weekend Mass at St. Clement are 3rd graders. They're also our largest group of altar servers. And it's the 3rd graders who have started to give me pieces of fruit, drawings, little homemade crafts, and handwritten notes on a regular basis. And they don't want me to see when they do it, so they'll say, Father Judd, look over there. And I look over there when I turn back on my lunch tray, and there's a nice little note or an orange. The most common message on the notes, I love you. Now, there was a famous book published in the 1980s, All I Really Need to Know. I learned in kindergarten. Do you remember that book? And in the early 2000s, there was a popular show on television, Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader? Do you remember that show? But as far as I know, there's nothing famous about 3rd grade.